when Pastor Matt called me last week asking about teaching this, he calls me and he says, "Hey, Jeff, listen, I think you really know a lot about this one subject. I think you're going to be able to teach it very well. I'd love to challenge you and try it out." And I said, "Well, I have no teaching experience, but if you say I know it so well, let's I'll go for it, I guess." And then I go, "So what am I going to be teaching?" And he tells me harmonic dictation. And immediately I think, of course I know what harmonic dictation is, right? Because that's just a normal term you hear every day. And it was one of those things where I did know what it was. It was just one of those really fancy words that you had no idea. And I think this entire subject is that kind of, oh, that's what that is. And that happens a lot, especially if you've been playing music for a long time. You'll find yourself hearing terms and being like, I have no idea what that is. And then someone explains it to you and they're like, oh, I've been doing that for 25 years. And that's just what I do. And so this, in layman's terms, is the number system. It's, if you've ever heard someone in a worship set say, hey, the chord progression is 1, 5, 6, 4, that's harmonic dictation. And we've actually spent our last unit talking a lot about the numbers and individual notes, specifically for melodies and soloing and just playing prophetic melodies and things like that. And you're also going to notice me look a lot at Pastor Matt tonight to see if I'm like doing good or bad, and see if he'll give me one like these, and you know. The goal of all of this, of I guess music in general for what it's worth, but I feel specifically this is kind of what he was saying, is just that it's so familiar that it becomes that second nature. It becomes just a piece of who you are, so that when you're leading worship, you're not thinking. When you have to, I remember during week of prayer, even we had one song, and I didn't even know I was leading that night. Pastor Matt had gotten sick, and he asked, "Hey, could you lead Sunday night?" And I was sick, and I'm like, "Sure, of course I can." And we had a song that was in C, and all of a sudden we were in the key of D, and pastor's like, "All right, let's sing." And I'm like, oh, I'm dead right now. I'm capoed the wrong way. I'm going to screw up. Let's just play it in D and pray the entire band. And they did. So this is one of those skills that are just so huge. And I'm trying to think what I should or shouldn't say. I wrote down notes, but like I said, no musical experience. There's 2 things you should know about me before I start, actually, and that is, 1, I do not play piano that well. This is going to be a stretch. And 2, I have a tendency to be extremely sarcastic, and actually, these are my worship team kids in the front row, and they constantly tell me that I'm so sarcastic all the time that often you can't tell if it's just me talking or my sarcasm. So if you think I said something and you're like, that sounds like nothing of what I should have just learned, it was just sarcasm, and I apologize in advance for it. So let's take a look at these sheets. So today we're going to work really simply. We know all the chords. We've heard them before. We just went through the unit of numbers, but in case you need to be reminded, every key has 8 notes, 1 through 8, and 8 is just 1 repeated. And as far as chords go, there's majors and minors, and I think we'll get into that more as we get further into the unit. But today we're going to focus mainly on the 1 chord and the 5 chord. And the reason why we start here is just because they are very distinct chords. The 1 has a tendency to just be home bass. In classical music, if you've taken any music classes, you learn immediately you cannot end a song on anything but the 1 chord, or else it's just terrible and you'll be kicked out of school and expelled and whatnot. So if this is your 1 chord, it always sounds like home bass. And then 5 chord immediately. If this is your key right here. Hey, I did it. Yeah, look at me go. That's my piano playing. The 5 chord just has this tendency, if this is your key right here, the 5 chord always has a tendency to just leave you with a lot of tension and like, where am I going kind of. This is your 1. That 5, see how you can never end on that. You always want to go back to 1. Is the piano loud enough? Can you hear it out there? So, before we get into too much how it sounds, let's just think of the actual numbers. Obviously, if it's 1 through 5, you can just count it up. Musical alphabet only comes from A to G, and G it restarts. So you see right there, if C is 1, you can count C, D, E, F, G. G is always 5 in the key of C. So let's see if we have any brave person. If A is the 1 chord, what would 5 be? You can count it up. You don't need to consider sharps and flats for now. See them kind of? E? That was very good. That was the correct answer. That was the exact answer that we were looking for. So like I said before, the numbers go in order to A and G, and then they start over. At some point, you're going to want to sit down and just do a task that's going to seem very unnecessary, but it's going to prove to be so important, and that is learning just what the sharps and flats are in each key. It's just one of those things that you're going to sit down and being like, why am I memorizing this? And then all of a sudden, you're going to realize exactly why. Because if you're in the key of B, and you think you're going to start off a scale, and you're like, all right, it's just 1-5, so it should be B, and then, oh, so it's B and F, and then all of a sudden you try to start your song, and you're like, that sounded nothing like before. What is, and all of a sudden you realize it's an F sharp. So that's something I would just encourage you, go home and do this week, within the next 2 weeks before we come back, because that's going to be huge to learning this. So if D is 1, then we see A would be the 5. Now, can anyone tell me if F is 1, what would the 5 be? C, yeah. And you could count that easily every time. So yeah. And there was even a story that Pastor Matt had told me when we were kind of planning this out, and it was of Mozart. Am I correct? It was Mozart. It wasn't Beethoven. And pretty much Mozart was just a terrible person from what I understand. He was just like mean to everybody, and he had this thing where whenever he heard there was a musical competition nearby, he would go to it and just crush whoever else was coming, whatever up-and-coming artist, just like taking candy from babies, just ruining people's lives all over the place. And so one night he was coming into to a concert to do what he would normally do, and so one of the other competitors heard that he was coming, and so they snuck into his house that he was staying at in the middle of the night, and they came to his piano and they played this while he was sleeping, keep in mind. And then just left, snuck off. Now, what was so weird about that? Can anyone tell me? Just the... What was that, Paul? Oh, it needs to resolve. And apparently he wrote letters to his father just saying, I couldn't sleep all night. I don't know what it was until the middle of the night I came downstairs, and I just knew I had to come to my piano and go. And he went to bed, slept very nicely, woke up the next morning, crushed everyone, and went back home to do whatever Mozart would do. And it reminds me of, you can get a very clear picture. I thought of when Dino at the end of service kind of plays, or at the end of worship time, and he's kind of playing while pastor's praying, and I just imagine if pastor was like, all right, thank you, orchestra, and the chord progression he chose was. And then we all just walked off, and pastor kind of started, all right, so we're going to start show our love to the Lord through giving today. And all service just in distress until Pastor Matt finally comes up, and he's like, at the end of service. So that's the clear difference you could hear. 1 always is going to sound like home bass. The 5 is always going to have, if you know solfege, it has that T in it that is just extremely leading you to 1. You know you can't sit on it. So we're going to try some exercises. There's some places to write out stuff, and I already have them written out so I don't mess up. So I'm going to give you guys a key, and I'm going to play 2 chords. I'm going to play either the 1 or the 5. I will play both, but it's going to be in a specific order, and you just have to write down which is first, which is second. So you could take one of those golf pencils out if you see them in your pew. So here's your key, and once again, excuse my scales if they're just terrible. Can everyone sing do? Sing the 1. Yeah, that's very good. That's it. So you can even think that in your head or hum it out loud to kind of hear what chords you should be hearing. So, do. So here's the chords I'm going to play. Do you want to hear them again? I'll play them again just in case. You could say out loud, I'm going to count to 3. You could kind of mumble with the person next to you in case you're wrong. 1, 2, 3. What's the order? 1, 5, exactly. And we're just looking for numbers. We're not looking for the actual letters. That's the other thing with this. This is specifically for relationships. It's specifically to hear. We've talked in the past about if you see 4 people walk into the sanctuary on a Sunday and you see a man and a woman holding hands, 2 kids fighting with each other, you may not be able to say Jim, Bob, Sally, Joe, and Samantha. But you can definitely say mom, dad, son, daughter. And it's all about hearing relationships. And the reason why is that some people, mainly just as I know Paul Firth, has perfect pitch. And you could just hear chords as you go. But for the majority of us normal people, you don't have perfect pitch. And therefore need to recognize the relationships to hear these chords compared to what key you're in. So that little tangent is kind of explaining why we do this. So I'm going to give you the next one. Here's your key. Okay, everyone sing 1. If you did that, you're right. All right, I'm going to play 2 chords now. Play those again. Does everyone have the order? The same. Yeah, 5-1, 5-1. And don't feel bad if you don't get it right on your first try, because this is something that just takes a very long time to develop, and we're going to talk about ways to practice this later. All right, I'm going to give you the next one. B flat. Why did I pick this key? Everyone sing 1. It's right there. Here are your chords. I'll play this again. Anyone have the order? 5-1. Did anyone say 5-1? That was it right there. You can almost hear the and I'm gradually moving out of, it's very easy to just put on top that kind of tension note and kind of hear like, and it's much more clear, but not every song is going to be so cut out that it's going to do that, because some songs are going to have a, and you're going to say that's different from, I thought it was always going to sound like, and it's just this all form of inversion. So moving on, here's your next key. Can everyone sing 1? You guys sound lovely, by the way. So here are your 2 chords. I'll play those again. Does anyone feel bold enough to answer? 1-5. 1-5. Yes, yes. And here's the last one for this. I picked the worst keys for the record. And here are your 2 chords. Can everyone sing to me 1? See what I mean about the worst key? Here are your chords. I'll play those again. Anyone have it? 5-1. That was it right there. All right, so we'll move on to this one. And we're not going to have the opportunity to hear both chords to kind of say oh, that one's definitely it. We're just going to stick to the 1. I'm going to play the 1 chord, and then I'm going to play another chord after that. And you need to tell me if that chord is either the 1 or the 5. Make sense? So I'm going to play through the key like I normally would. There it is, something like that. If I only had a guitar. And then after that, I'm going to play a chord. And it's either going to be the 1 or the 5. But I'm not going to play 2 chords. So it's not which is first or second. It's just that's definitely the 1 or that's definitely the 5. Make sense? All right, cool. Here's your key. There's your 1. You can even keep humming that in your head. That's always an easy way to get started on it. So. That's the 5. That's the 5. Can you hear the tension between the? You can very, very clearly hear that it's. All right, here's your next key. All right. Here's your chord. Can anyone tell me what it is? That's the 1. That's the 1. All right, here's your next key. Pastor Matt, how are you doing? Are you doing well on this? Okay. Just want to double check. Here's the next key. There's your 1. 1 or 5? 5. That's the 5 right there. Yeah, I don't know. Who shouted that one out? Oh, it was my kids. I'm just such a proud dad. I don't know what else to do. All right, let's try this one out. Can someone sing me 1? I'm telling you, that's always helpful. You always got to find your 1 first, because there are plenty of times where you find the wrong 1, and then you have an entire song in the wrong key. And that's no fun for anybody. So, there's your 1. 1 or 5? 5. Exactly. Last one. Give me 1. I just like making you guys sing because I don't want to talk the whole time. So here's the chord. What is it? 1. Y'all catching on too fast. All right. So here's the imaginary 1 that we created. You're going to have to write them in. I'm going 5 more. And I'm either going to play, we're going to do it the same way we did the last one. I'm only going to play 1 chord. But what I'm going to do is either play 1, 5, or a completely different chord that we haven't learned how to hear yet. So you're just going to write 1, 5, or just write something else. Yeah? Or just question. They said question. Yeah, or just question mark. However you want to write it down, that's fine. The idea is just either 1, 5, or something else. So here is your key. I like the initiative of just singing that one out. All right, so here is your chord. One, you got it. All right, here's your key again. And we got 1. It's right there. Here's your chord. Anyone know? Is it 1, 5, or something else? Yes, something else. If you can't recognize it, odds are it is something else. There are. Well, she got it. That is the 6 minor. We'll be doing that in like 4 weeks. Here's your next key. Here's your key. Can you sing me one? That's it right there. And here's your chord. Try to make this tricky. There's still your 1. And I'm going to play it again. Here's your key. And here's the chord. Has anyone got it? That's the 5. And see, what I did was I tricked you guys. I could explain how I tricked you, but it won't work in the future if I explain now, so. Here's your next key. There's your 1. What is it? That would be the 1. I put it down here. It's kind of a different way of hearing. It's kind of weirder opposed to just your standard 1, 3, 5. It's all down here. It's a different inversion where you're playing 1, 5, 3. But those are the things you'll gradually pick up on it as you hear it. And I'll give you guys one more, and then we're done, because I know this is a lot to learn. I'll play it again. Here's your 1. Does anyone have it? What did you say? It is the 4. But something else, for those who didn't know the 4 on that one. So that's pretty much it. The idea, the name of the game is to hear the chord, and you just want to either say for now 1, 5, or something else. The easiest way to practice this is going to be listening to music that is somewhat simple music. Don't listen to you're not going to be able to pick this up by listening to be blessing and honor and glory and power forever. Because there's just too much going on in that one. And sits on the throne and unto the Lamb. You're going to be so confused. Listen to just basic worship music. The last Hillsong album, Bethel album, anything like that. And just try to pick out what is 1, what is 5, what is something else. And this is one of those things you're going to really want to practice. I would say the leading cause of stagnant musicians is lack of practice, of people who just feel like I haven't learned anything in a very long time. Odds are you're not practicing what you already know. So just sitting down and practicing this, just literally listening. There's something to be said about practicing music without holding an instrument in your hand and just completely getting head knowledge so that you can put it on your instrument and be able to play it. But it starts off at just listening to that music and listening to 1, 5, or something else. And then what you even do is you could print out the music online afterwards to kind of test yourself. Or you could try to play along and see if it just doesn't sound right. And another way that is just really good at being able to figure out just what in each key, if you're in the key of C, what is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is literally printing out music, printing out any song. There are plenty of websites, printing out a worship song in any key, and just writing the numbers next to the letters. Write the numbers next to them and just say, all right, we're in the key of C, so C is the 1. And then we get F. F is the 1, 2, 3, 4. F's the 4. So then you write 4 next to that. And you gradually get to this place where you actually memorize per key. I remember when I was first taking guitar lessons with Pastor Matt, we did guitar for maybe a year. And then I came in one day, and he goes, so we're going to start some music theory today for like half the lesson. Is that cool? And I'm like, of course, whatever you say, that's cool. And then that half lesson turned into the whole lesson. And eventually he was just my music teacher. And we got to this point where it was just ridiculous, just knowledge that I'm like, oh my goodness. But I remember the first one, we were talking about composing, and he told me to write out, we're going to learn the bass clef today. And I didn't know the bass clef, so that was great stuff to learn. And he explained to me what it was. And I remember he says, go home and just memorize it. Memorize every note in the bass clef. And I said, great, okay, I could do that. And I remember within sitting down for 3 minutes with this bass clef, I realized that it's just a whole step off from the treble clef. And I said, I just saved myself a week of practice and memorizing. I know it. We got to call the professional music people and tell them that their clef is only a whole step off from the rest of the clefs. This is easy. So I come back the next week, I look at it in the car ride, I'm like, I got this. So we sit down, the first thing he does, he says, all right, let's look at the bass clef. What's this note? And I said, it's a G. And he's like, okay, what's this note? And I go, that's a E. And he says, what's this thing? And I'm like, Pastor Matt, you're never going to believe what I figured out this week. You got to call your old professors. This is it. It's a whole step off from the treble clef. You don't actually have to memorize all these clefs. They're the same thing. And he says, you've made just like the worst mistake you possibly could. He didn't really say that, but it felt like that in my heart. And he says, the whole idea is that it becomes second nature. The whole idea of memorizing the bass clef is that you've just added on 2 extra steps on something that should just be, oh, that's a C, that's an E. So in the same way, it's very easy to say, all right, well, I know the numbers. I know in the key of C that if I just count up 5, I'll get a G, and that's easy. But it's much more significant to just say, I'm in the key of G. What is 6? It's an A. Makes much more sense to just memorize that. It's a little extra time, but in the long haul, you're going to get yourself to a place where you're like, oh my goodness, I have it all down. So you could come up here and clean up what I said. Make it make a little more sense. That is all.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that was great, Jeff. Excellent job. So yeah, and I would just to put in my own 2 cents and just say that key that Jeff said is just so important, which is that keeping dough in your ear. Finding dough and keeping dough in your ear is so good. That was like a little nugget that he put out there that's actually really, really good advice. So if you can find dough and just hold it, watch what happens. And he just demonstrated, but I'll just do it one more time. Watch what happens if you hold dough over the 5 chord. It's horrible, right? But over the 1 chord, it makes sense. Well, it only makes sense. You're singing a 1 and you're playing a 1. It works. It doesn't work over the 5 chord. So right there's your instant. I can tell you right now if it's a 1 or a 5 instantly, because all I have to do is hum dough. If you find dough and hold it in your ear, then as soon as someone plays 1, if it sounds great, it's 1. If it sounds bad, it's 5 because you're humming dough. But it's about finding dough and holding on to it while these chords are going by. So that's great advice.